My name is Danny Villa-Giroux, an assistant professor in the College of Health, Human Services, and Science, and I'd like to thank you for taking the opportunity to watch today's presentation titled Avoid Repetition, Tips for Creating Unique Discussion Replies. So, as the title suggests, we're going to be taking a look at ways in which we can create unique replies for our students in the discussion forums. We'll discuss some of the factors that can contribute to the creation of instructor replies that might be on the repetitive side, and we'll also take a look at some practical suggestions for how you can develop and share replies with your students that are both unique as well as meet their learning needs. The tips that I'll be sharing with you today reflect a combination of looking at some of the current methods that we use to participate with students in the discussion forums, as well as presenting some helpful ways to utilize prompts and student replies. So this is a great presentation for faculty who are new to Ashford, as well as those current faculty who'd like a refresher. Ultimately, it's my hope that you walk away from today's presentation with some practical approaches that you can implement in your classroom right away to help you develop unique discussion replies. I hope you find this presentation to be an informative addition to your resources as an instructor. And with that, let's get started. Hello everyone, and thank you once again for watching today's presentation. So the structure of today's presentation will be broken down into 4 primary parts. In part 1, we'll discuss some of the challenges that are associated with repetitious replies. In part 2, I'll present some tips and suggestions for the creation of unique discussion replies. Part 3 will involve some practical examples that I will walk you through. And part 4 will involve some concluding points and considerations. So as we all know, the discussion forum is a main way in which we engage with our students in the classroom. It's where we exchange ideas, it's where we stimulate and encourage critical thinking skills, it's where we promote interaction between students and between ourselves and our students, and it's where we as instructors can help foster an environment of learning for our students. Ultimately, we want to make sure that we're providing discussion replies to our students that are unique, but sometimes that might feel a little challenging. So before we jump into some practical tips and suggestions, let's consider some of the factors that might contribute to repetitive replies. So while there might be various factors that could contribute to this, let's just consider the ones that are presented here on the slide. The first factor is time. We are all very busy as instructors and we're engaged in various endeavors, and for most, if not all of us, time can be a really big factor in our ability to get creative in our responses. Teaching the same course multiple times can also be a factor. If an instructor has taught the same class many times, for instance, that might make it difficult for the instructor to find opportunities to provide unique replies. Another has to do with the types of replies that the students are providing. If the replies are very similar, then there could be some challenges for the instructor in terms of finding ways to create those unique replies. Sometimes, as creatures of habit, we get comfortable in our routines, and when we're comfortable, we may not be as inventive in our approach to connect with students in a unique way. And lastly, it's possible that a new instructor, for instance, may not be aware of the great resources that are available to share with students. Or maybe there might be challenges in terms of finding out the best way to use them so that the students get the most benefit from them. Inevitably, there are going to be some repetitive components that are associated with the discussion forums that the instructor may not be able to change. For example, the discussion prompt, or the fact that students might be responding in a similar manner, for instance. However, that shouldn't preclude instructors from getting as creative as they can in their approaches to respond to students with a unique and personal touch. And that's really the essence of today's presentation, to offer you some examples of things to think about and incorporate as you prepare your discussion replies to your students. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at some ways to create unique discussion replies. So what I've shared on this slide are 6 suggestions and tips that I'll be sharing with you today, and I'll go into more detail into each one of them in the upcoming slides. This list is by no means inclusive, and not every suggestion provided is necessarily applicable to every situation. However, I found these to be really great ways for me to engage with my students in a unique manner, and I hope you find them helpful as well. So, in order, the tips and suggestions are: know your discussion prompts, personalize, 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 look for different windows of opportunity, respond to replies from different angles, integrate and share outside resources, and ask a variety of questions. So while this might seem fairly rudimentary, I really think that getting to know your discussion prompts well is one of the best ways to get started in preparing unique replies. So take some time before your class starts, or before students start to post in the forums, and consider asking yourself the following questions. Is it likely to result in similar responses from students? Does the prompt ask for a specific type of answer? Is there flexibility with respect to how it is answered by the student? Is there a word count? This is something that I really like to do because it gets me thinking about some of the different types of ways that I might want to respond based on my understanding of the prompt's features, in conjunction with what the students might be contributing as well. And this is one approach that I can take even before the students get started to engage in the discussion forums. So knowing your prompts really well is a great way to get yourself started. The second tip I'd like to share is to personalize, personalize, personalize. As instructors, we really want to infuse those personal touches throughout our courses, and the discussion forums provide so many great opportunities to engage and connect with our students in ways that are meaningful. There are various ways in which this can be done, but here are 4 ways to consider. Address the student by his or her name, which is always really important to do in the forums. Reference unique or specific content areas identified by the student when replying. Make it relatable to the student's own experience and insight. And share resources, content, or ask questions that are tailored to the student and his or her needs. Some of these suggestions I'll go into detail in other slides, but the main message of this tip is to let your students know throughout your interactions that your responses are speaking to their contributions. The third tip that I'd like to share with you today is to look for different windows of opportunity when you are getting student responses in the forums. I'm a firm believer that there are always windows of opportunity. It's really just a matter of finding them. So, similar to what I mentioned in the first tip that I shared, this one involves asking some questions as well. Only this time, they're about the actual replies that are provided by your students in the forums. Part of what I do when I review my students' posts is to scan them for information that helps me to determine how to best address the student's reply. Among the questions that I ask myself are, didn't the student sufficiently answer the prompt? Were there areas where more elaboration could have been provided? Did the student's response signify the need to provide more instruction? And are there words, sentences, or phrases that stand out in the post in any way? So really what you're doing here is identifying the areas where you might want to focus on as part of your reply, taking into consideration your assessment of what the student might need or benefit from. Tip number 4 is to consider addressing replies from multiple angles. Similar to what I shared in the previous slide, it's important to consider the learning needs of your students when you create your replies to them. No 2 students are alike, and neither are their posts. So 2 ways you can consider approaching a post could be to either expand upon the post or to change directions in some way. For instance, expanding could involve probing for more insight or critical thinking on the same topics that are addressed by the student or the prompt. For example, if depth might be lacking in the student's initial post, or when you want to share any relevant resources or expertise that might relate to it. This is a good option to pursue if you feel that the student didn't sufficiently demonstrate a solid understanding or offer a lot of detail on a particular issue. Changing directions involves shifting the focus to an allied topic to promote critical thinking. So for example, when a reply is well developed, when a slightly different topic or concept has utility in the current discussion, or when similar topics can offer opportunities for different points of view. This option would be suited to a situation where a student has a really good understanding of a concept, and maybe you feel that they're ready to take their learning to the next level. Integrating and sharing applicable outside resources is another tip that can help in the development of creating unique discussion replies. Apart from the course text and the required readings, there are a variety of additional resources that you can use, such as websites, video clips, and articles from our library. One thing to think about is how these resources are used. For example, they can be used to infuse additional context and instruction. They can be used to provide additional resources for further reading or food for thought. They can be used as the basis for asking critical thinking questions. and they can be helpful for you in starting and adding to an ongoing repository of applicable resources and content. And don't forget that your own experience and insight are really great and beneficial to our students who really appreciate learning from a professional with a background in the area that they're studying. So consider drawing from your knowledge and expertise using real or fictional examples. The last tip I'd like to share with you involves asking questions. Now, one of the ways in which we as instructors seek to interact more with our students in the forums is to pose questions. But it's important to consider the kinds of questions that we ask and the purposes that they serve. One of the considerations to keep in mind relates to the level of the course. So, if you're teaching a course at the 100 or 200 level, for instance, consider asking questions that encourage students to identify, describe, and explain concepts and topics, while asking questions that require more rigor, such as analyzing, developing, or creating, would be better suited to students in upper level courses. Asking questions that involve prompting students to review the posts of others is also great to consider. And considering the types of answers that you're likely to receive from the students based on the question you ask is also important too. So for instance, are you always asking students for their thoughts on a topic? Or are you also asking questions that go beyond just asking for their opinions? Also, are you asking primarily yes or no questions, such as, do you agree? Or are your questions more open-ended? These are just some things to think about. So just to provide a little more insight into asking questions, in an interesting faculty-focused article by Weimer titled The Art of Asking Questions, Weimer identifies several things to consider with regard to asking questions, such as considering questions in advance, making note of good questions, asking questions that can't be answered, or questions that you don't have an answer to. From a more scholarly perspective, Delanoche, Scheffel, and Lowry found that students were more likely to answer those instructor questions that were authentic and exhibited uptake of the students' comments. Authentic questions refer to questions where the instructor doesn't already know the answer. Okay, so now that we've explored some of the tips and suggestions that we can use for creating unique replies, I'd like to briefly walk you through some practice examples to illustrate how these can be applied. The next several slides present fictional examples of two student responses to a discussion forum. Both students, Jonathan and Sally, are given the task of preparing an initial reply. Take the opportunity to review their responses, reflect on their similarities and their differences, and consider how you would prepare a unique reply for each of these students. This first example comes from fictional student Jonathan, who was tasked with explaining the concept of primary prevention, as well as discussing an example of it. Pause the presentation and take the opportunity to read Jonathan's reply. You can find a PDF copy of this example titled Slide 16 Example among the resources that accompany this presentation. So now that you've read Jonathan's reply, ask yourself the following questions. What do you notice about the prompt? What are your initial observations about Jonathan's post? How well does the post address all of the prompt elements? And what opportunities might there be for you to provide a unique reply to Jonathan based on his initial post? In this slide, you'll see that the comments provided to the right of Jonathan's post reflect some examples of ideas of how an instructor could potentially respond. You can review the PDF document for slide 18 for a larger version of this, but I'll go ahead and read the comments to you. The first comment that I provided has to do with Jonathan's response as a whole. So Jonathan's response is under the minimum word limit. So the question posed is, what opportunities might there be for additional examination of the topic areas? The other comment that I provided has to do with the fact that there are certain components of the prompt that every student is going to be including. So in this case, the reasons that are provided for primary prevention are going to be included in every student's response, as the text identifies for. So, could the instructor share some professional examples of these, or potentially identify other reasons that might be relevant to primary prevention? This could provide an opportunity to share a relevant example or insight in some way. Comment 3 relates to Jonathan's explanation. Are there ways that Jonathan's explanation for these reasons could be fleshed out more. This could be something that the instructor might want to focus on. Comment 4, Jonathan only uses the textbook to support his discussion of primary prevention. So there's an opportunity for encouraging him to expand more on his ideas with regard to a primary prevention initiative using an outside source. Comment 5, Jonathan identifies education as a primary prevention measure, but there are still some opportunities that exist for more elaboration or application of this. And here we have a worked out sample instructor reply that incorporates various tips and suggestions that were provided earlier. You can refer to the PDF document titled Slide 19 example for a larger view of the comments, but I'll go ahead and read them now. There are many ways to approach replying to Jonathan in this particular instance, but the primary focus of this response will be to help further Jonathan's understanding of his chosen method, which is education, using a real-life example, and 2, to encourage completion of the discussion prompt by addressing the missing areas. Comment 2 revolves around personalizing the reply by referring to the student by name and referencing the topic areas that are chosen by the student. In comment 3 involves sharing a professional example further illustrating education as a primary prevention effort. So in this example, the fictional instructor has shared his or her own professional experience in this particular example. Comment 4 involves use of an outside source to supplement content and provide an example of a health and human service organization that provides preventive services. And lastly, since Jonathan did not address the part of the prompt involving discussion of benefits, posing this question encourages him to address it. So by doing this, he provides more elaboration to his post to meet the requirement of addressing all of the prompt elements. Here's a second example provided by fictional student Sally, who has provided her contribution to the same prompt from the first example. And you can find this example titled Slide 20 example in the documents provided. So now that you've taken the opportunity to review Sally's initial post, ask yourself the same questions as from the first example. What are your initial observations about Sally's post? How well does this post address all of the prompt elements? And what opportunities might there be for you to provide a unique reply to Sally based on her initial post? So, in comparing the two sample student responses, we can see that there are some clear similarities and differences between them. And the comments on the right-hand side reflect some examples of approaches that an instructor could potentially take when responding to the student. You can find this sample example as Slide 22 example in the resources, but I'll go ahead and read the comments that are provided on the right-hand side of the screen. The first comment has to do with the fact that Sally's post is well above the minimum word length and sufficiently addresses the prompt elements. So this could present some opportunities for the instructor to either continue the discussion or to perhaps find another angle in which to address it. Comment 2, the reasons that Sally provides in the initial reply with respect to why primary prevention is important are going to be pretty similar across students. So similar to the previous example, this could provide the instructor an opportunity to either share another professional example that could relate, or maybe include the use of outside resources in some way to perhaps elaborate on some of those responses. Comment 3 involves the possibility of the instructor initiating further discussion on some of the other examples that Sally provides. And comment 4, Sally's topic selection could provide the instructor an opportunity to expand teaching opportunities in that area. And now comes your opportunity to think about how you would create a reply to Sally that is unique to her post. So if you're interested in applying the initial ideas presented in the previous slide, or even coming up with some different ideas of your own, consider creating a fictional response for this student. And so, to summarize today's presentation, I'd like to share just a few concluding points. Ultimately, the tips that I've shared today are just a few of many different ways that we can endeavor to be unique in our discussion replies to our students. Keep in mind that each student is unique, and your replies should be to them as well. Keep in mind what the student could benefit from. So really think about what your student might need from you as you prepare your responses. Utilize a range of techniques to support student learning. The library, the internet, and your own professional expertise are really great resources to utilize in the creation of unique replies. And lastly, have fun. We're all here because we care about the success of our students, and the forum can be a really great place for you to really showcase the range of your knowledge and expertise. And with that, thank you so much for watching today's presentation, and I wish you much success in the development of your unique discussion replies.